Let me tell you how I ended up in the worst nightmare of my life. It started when I saw that ad online. Caretaker needed for remote cabin. High pay. No questions asked. At first, I thought it was a joke or some kind of scam. I mean, who offers a high-paying job with no questions? But I was broke, behind on rent, and desperate. My landlord had just given me a final warning, and my bank account was dwindling faster than I could find a new job. I had bills piling up, and my family was counting on me to get my life together. I remember sitting in my cramped apartment, the flickering light bulb overhead casting shadows on the peeling walls. I was scrolling through job listings, feeling the weight of my situation pressing down on me. That's when I stumbled upon the ad. The font was strange, almost like it had been typed on an old typewriter, with uneven letters that seemed to dance on the screen. There were no contact details, just a set of coordinates leading deep into the woods. My heart raced as I read the description again. A caretaker? It sounded simple enough. I could handle that. But skepticism crept in. What kind of cabin needed a caretaker? Why was it so remote? I imagined myself alone in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. But then I thought about my mounting debts, the eviction notice taped to my door, and the disappointed looks on my family's faces. I couldn't let them down. So, I took a deep breath and clicked on the coordinates. The screen flashed, and a map appeared, showing a winding road that led to a spot far from civilization. I felt a mix of excitement and dread. What if this was my chance to turn things around? I decided to go for it. After all, what did I have to lose? The next day, I packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, snacks, and a flashlight. I drove for hours, the city fading behind me as I ventured into the unknown. The road became narrower, flanked by towering trees that seemed to close in around me. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. I was determined to make this work. When I finally arrived at the cabin, my heart sank. It was even more isolated than I had imagined. The structure was old, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and moss. I stepped out of my car, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet echoing in the stillness. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as nerves. As I approached the door, I noticed a small envelope taped to it. My name was scrawled across the front in a shaky hand. Inside were the 11 rules I was to follow during my stay. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I read each one. They were bizarre, almost ominous. Never go outside after dark. Do not open the basement door. If you hear knocking, ignore it. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. What had I gotten myself into? But I pushed the doubts aside. I needed this job. I needed to prove to myself and my family that I could handle anything. Little did I know, those rules were just the beginning of a nightmare I could never have anticipated. As I settled into the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The woods felt alive, and the silence was deafening. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew I was in for a long, terrifying stay. The GPS cut out 2 miles before the location. I cursed under my breath, tapping the screen in frustration, but it was no use. No cell service. Just me, my car, and an overgrown dirt road that seemed to lead into the heart of nowhere. The trees loomed overhead, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach as I drove deeper into the woods, the sunlight fading behind the thick canopy. Finally, I rounded a bend, and there it was, the cabin. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The once vibrant red paint was now a dull, peeling shell, flaking away to reveal the weathered wood beneath. The shutters hung askew, creaking softly in the wind, and the front porch sagged as if it were weary from years of neglect. A rusted mailbox stood at the end of the driveway, its door hanging open, revealing a pile of yellowed newspapers that had long since been forgotten. As I stepped out of the car, a musty smell hit me, wet earth mixed with something metallic, like blood. I wrinkled my nose, trying to shake off the feeling that I had stumbled into a horror movie set. The air was thick with humidity, and the silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of an animal. Or was it an animal? The sound sent a shiver down my spine, and I glanced around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. I approached the cabin cautiously, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. The door was slightly ajar, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. Dust motes danced in the dim light, filtering through the grimy windows. I stepped inside, my heart racing, and immediately felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. In the corner of the room stood a rickety table, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. A single chair sat beside it, as if waiting for someone to take a seat. I noticed a fireplace, its hearth cold and empty, the remnants of old ashes scattered across the floor. I could almost hear the whispers of the past echoing in the silence, stories of those who had come before me. Then, my eyes fell on an envelope resting on the table. It was sealed with wax, the emblem distorted and hard to make out. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The handwriting looked burned into the paper, jagged and uneven, as if written in haste. My name was scrawled across the front, and a chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, glancing around the room as if expecting someone to jump out at me. But I was alone. I tore open the envelope, my heart pounding as I pulled out the contents. Inside were the 11 rules I was to follow during my stay. Each rule felt like a warning, a dark promise of what could happen if I didn't comply. Never go outside after dark. Do not open the basement door. If you hear knocking, ignore it. The words seemed to echo in my mind, amplifying the sense of dread that had settled in my chest. I looked around the cabin again, the shadows stretching and shifting as the light began to fade. I felt a growing sense of foreboding, as if the very walls were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. As I stood there, clutching the rules in my trembling hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The cabin was alive with secrets, and I was about to uncover them all, whether I wanted to or not. As I sat in the dim light of the cabin, the envelope of rules felt heavier in my hands. Each rule seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering warnings that sent chills down my spine. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the growing sense of paranoia that clung to me like a shadow. I had to know what I was dealing with, so I began to read through the rules one by one. Rule number 1, never leave after sunset. The road disappears. I scoffed at first, thinking it was just a way to keep me from wandering off. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt an inexplicable urge to test it. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cool air wrapping around me like a shroud. As I walked down the dirt road, the trees loomed taller, their branches twisting like fingers reaching for me. I turned back to look at the cabin, its silhouette growing smaller in the fading light. Suddenly, I heard a low rumble in the distance. I squinted into the darkness and saw headlights approaching. Relief washed over me, until the lights flickered and vanished into the woods, swallowed by the shadows. My heart raced as I turned back toward the cabin, the path now shrouded in darkness. I hurried back, the weight of the rules settling heavily on my chest. Rule number 4, don't light a fire in the fireplace. It draws them in. The chill of the night seeped into the cabin, and I felt a desperate need for warmth. Ignoring the rule, I gathered some old logs and set them in the fireplace. As I struck a match, the flames flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For a moment, I felt a sense of comfort. But then, a scratching noise echoed from the chimney, a sound that sent a jolt of fear through me. I froze, the warmth of the fire suddenly feeling sinister. The scratching grew louder, like claws scraping against metal. I dropped the match, the flames sputtering out as I backed away from the fireplace. My heart raced as I realized I had awakened something that should have remained undisturbed. I extinguished the fire, the room plunging back into darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from above. Rule number 7. If you hear knocking, say not today and walk away. The night deepened, and I tried to distract myself with a book, but the silence was suffocating. At exactly 3 a.m., I was jolted from my thoughts by a series of 3 sharp knocks on the front door. My heart pounded in my chest as I remembered the rule. Not today, I whispered to myself, but curiosity gnawed at me. I hesitated, the knocking growing more insistent. It felt as if the sound was shifting, moving from the door to the basement. I could almost hear a voice, low and beckoning, urging me to come closer. I gripped the edge of the table, torn between fear and the need to know what was happening. The knocking stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt heavy in the air. I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk away, but the unease lingered. What was down there? What had I awakened? The rules were becoming more than just guidelines. They were warnings etched in fear. As I lay in bed, the weight of the rules pressed down on me, each one a reminder of the danger lurking just beyond the walls of the cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the very cabin itself was alive, waiting for me to slip up. I had to uncover the truth behind these rules, but with each passing moment, my paranoia grew. What would happen if I broke another rule? What was waiting for me in the darkness? And what was Rule 11? I could only imagine the horrors it might hold. The basement door loomed in the corner of the cabin, a heavy slab of wood reinforced with a rusty padlock. It was the only door I hadn't dared to open, and yet it called to me with an unsettling allure. I had followed the rules, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more my curiosity grew. At night, the cabin was filled with strange sounds, but the most disturbing was the dragging noise that echoed from below. It was a sound that sent chills racing down my spine, a metallic scraping, like chains being pulled across the floor. I lay in bed, the darkness pressing in around me, and listened intently. The noise was persistent, a rhythmic dragging that seemed to grow louder as the hours passed. I could almost picture whatever was down there, straining against its restraints, desperate to break free. I shivered at the thought, my mind racing with possibilities. What could be locked away in that basement? The next day, I decided to investigate. I crept into the attic, hoping to find some clues about the cabin's history. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I felt a sense of foreboding as I pushed open the attic door. Dust motes danced in the slanting light, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. Old furniture was strewn about, covered in sheets that looked like ghosts waiting to be uncovered. As I rummaged through the clutter, I stumbled upon a box filled with faded photographs. My heart raced as I flipped through them, each image revealing a different caretaker. They all wore forced smiles, but their eyes held a haunting emptiness. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that none of them had ever returned. The last photo was dated over a decade ago, the caretaker's face barely recognizable, as if the years had drained the life from them. I set the photos aside, my mind racing with questions. What had happened to them? Why had they vanished? The unease settled deeper in my gut, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was following in their footsteps. As I continued to search, I noticed a loose floorboard in the corner of the attic. My heart raced as I pried it up, revealing a small, weathered journal hidden beneath. The pages were yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting was still legible. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I read the first entry. Day 1, the cabin feels alive. I hear whispers at night. Day 3, I found scratches on the basement door. Something is trying to get out. Day 7, it mimics voices. I heard my mother calling for me. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I read the words. The journal belonged to a previous caretaker, and it was clear they had succumbed to the same dread that was now consuming me. I flipped through the pages, each entry more frantic than the last. The final entry was scrawled in a shaky hand. I can't stay here. It knows my name. I can hear it calling me. I'm afraid I won't be able to leave. I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The rules weren't protecting me. They were protecting whatever was inside that basement. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I thought about the dragging chains, the whispers in the night, and the eyes that seemed to watch me from the shadows. I had to confront the basement. I had to know what was down there, but the fear of what I might find paralyzed me. The scratching sounds grew louder in my mind, echoing the warnings of the rules. I was trapped in a web of fear and curiosity, and I knew that I couldn't ignore it any longer. As night fell, I stood before the basement door, the padlock glinting ominously in the dim light. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Whatever was behind that door had been waiting for someone to uncover its secrets, and I was about to find out just how deep the darkness ran. Midnight crept through the cabin like a living thing. I stood paralyzed before the east window, the one place I'd been warned never to look from when the clock struck 12. Every muscle screamed for me to turn away, but curiosity, cold and insistent, dug its claws in deeper. Just one glance. I peeled back the moth-eaten curtain, while rising in my throat as my own face stared back at me from the treeling. It was me, every detail perfect, from the ragged flannel I wore down to the scar on my left eyebrow. But the eyes were wrong, hollow, and the smile, too wide, stretching skin until it split at the edges. It raised a single finger to its lips in a mockery of silence before vanishing into the dark. The cold shock lasted only seconds before the lanterns appeared, globes of sickly yellow light bobbing between the pines, weaving closer with awful purpose. They cast no light on the ground, only upward, illuminating the faces of those who carried them. Figures draped in tattered coats, their heads hanging at unnatural angles. I stumbled back as the nearest lantern paused at my window. The thing holding it lifted its chin. No eyes, just hollow sockets weeping thick, black fluid. The power went out. Darkness swallowed me whole. I crashed into furniture, my breath ragged as the front door shuddered under a colossal impact. Wood splintered. The thing outside whimpered in my voice. "Let me in. I'm scared." I barricaded the door with the dining table, nails screeching as something dragged itself up the porch steps. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, not mine, but matching my sprint from moments before. The rules changed. The realization hit like a blow. Frantic, I clawed through the envelope. 11 rules yesterday. Now, smudged ink bled into a 12th line at the bottom. Rule 12, when it wears your face, run. The basement door exploded inward. Chains slithered across hardwood. Something laughed with my laugh, sobbed with my sobs. I vaulted over the sofa as the window shattered behind me. Cold fingers brushed my ankle, and then I was moving, crashing through the back door into moonlit woods. Branches lashed my face as I ran, the lanterns bobbing behind me in a relentless procession. They weren't chasing. They were hurting. The cabin's silhouette faded behind me, but the whispers didn't. A chorus of my own voice, calling from every direction. You forgot Rule 13. I ran. I don't remember how long I sprinted through the woods, branches clawing at my skin, the cold air burning my lungs. The lanterns flickered behind me, their light weaving through the trees like a predator stalking its prey. I could hear the whispers growing louder, echoing my own voice, taunting me with every step. You forgot Rule 12. I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest, the fear of what was behind me propelling me forward. I didn't stop to think about where I was going. I just needed to get away from that cabin, from the thing that wore my face. The darkness enveloped me, but I pressed on, driven by sheer instinct. Finally, I broke through the tree-line and found myself on the dirt road. The moon hung high above, casting an eerie glow on the path ahead. I could see my car in the distance, a beacon of hope. I sprinted toward it, fumbling for my keys as I reached the driver's side door. My hands shook as I inserted the key into the ignition, praying it would start. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the gear into drive, tires screeching as I sped away from that cursed place. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove for what felt like hours, the road stretching endlessly before me, the weight of the cabin lifting with every mile I put between us. But as the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape, a sense of unease settled in my gut. I had escaped, but at what cost? The memories of that night haunted me, the whispers echoing in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I was free, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Weeks passed, and I tried to return to normalcy. I found a new job, reconnected with friends, and even started to forget the horrors of the cabin. But then, late one night, my phone rang. The screen lit up with my own number. My heart dropped as I hesitated, staring at the caller ID. I answered, my voice trembling. "Hello." Silence. Then, a whisper, soft and chilling. "You forgot Rule 12. I dropped the phone, my breath hitching in my throat. I could feel the walls closing in around me, the shadows creeping back into my life. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was just a prank, but the calls kept coming. Each time, the same whisper, the same chilling reminder. I started recording videos, hoping to document my experience, to prove to myself that I was still sane. But when I watched the footage, I noticed something strange. There were glitches, moments where my reflection didn't match my movements, where the shadows behind me seemed to shift and pulse with a life of their own. I could see the flicker of something in the background, a fleeting glimpse of a figure that looked eerily familiar. I tried to reach out for help, but no one believed me. They laughed it off, chalking it up to stress or a vivid imagination. But I knew the truth. I had escaped the cabin, but I hadn't escaped its grip. The rules had changed, and I was now part of its twisted game. As I lay in bed at night, the whispers grew louder, echoing through the darkness. I could feel the weight of the cabin pressing down on me, the knowledge that I was never truly free. Did I escape? Or was I now just another voice in the cabin's lure, forever trapped in its haunting embrace? The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I realized that the true horror was not what I had left behind, but what I had brought with me. Hey there, friends. So, after everything I just shared, I have to ask, ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong? You know, that gut feeling that something isn't quite right? Maybe it was a hotel with creaky floors, or a cabin in the woods that gave you the heebie-jeebies. I want to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. Let's swap tales of the eerie and the unexplained. I can't be the only one who's had a brush with the bizarre, right? There's something about those experiences that sticks with you, like a shadow that refuses to fade. Maybe you heard whispers in the night or saw something out of the corner of your eye that made you question your sanity. Whatever it is, I want to know. And speaking of strange places, if you ever come across that caretaker ad I mentioned, the one that promises high pay and no questions asked, do yourself a favor. Burn it. Seriously. Or better yet, mail it to me. I've got questions for whoever wrote it. What were they thinking? What kind of twisted game were they playing? I mean, who in their right mind would want to spend time in a remote cabin with a list of ominous rules? It's like they were inviting someone to step into a horror movie. I can't help but wonder if there's a whole network of caretakers out there, each with their own stories of dread and survival. So, if you've got any leads on that ad or know someone who's taken the plunge into that kind of job, let's connect. I'm all ears. Maybe we can piece together the mystery of that cabin and the fate of its past caretakers. And hey, if you're feeling brave, why not share your own rules for survival? What would you add to the list? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it takes to make it through a night in a place that feels alive with secrets. Remember, we're in this together. Let's build a community of storytellers, where we can share our fears and laugh at the absurdity of it all. After all, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that remind us we're not alone in our experiences. So hit that comment section. I can't wait to read your tales of the uncanny and the unexplained. And who knows, maybe together we can unravel the mysteries that lurk in the shadows. Just remember, if you hear knocking at your door, maybe it's best to say, "Not today."